This is Jim Bish with the Americans in Wartime Museum. Today's date is March 28, 2019, and I am with Walter Oleszkowicz.
That's right.
In Sun City, Arizona. Walter, could you please give me your full name and where you were born?
Walter J. Oleszkowicz. Never changed my name, I probably should have. And I was born in Detroit, Michigan.
Okay, thank you. Did you grow up in Detroit, Michigan?
Yes, I did, yes.
And did you graduate from school there, high school there?
Yes, I did. U of D High School.
Okay. And where did you do after you graduated? What year was that? Do you remember?
From high school, 1942.
1942. So your senior year is when Pearl Harbor occurred?
Yes, that's right.
In December. What do you remember about hearing about Pearl Harbor?
Well, I remember, of course, Pearl Harbor was pretty significant, but the attack on Poland is what I really remember, because that was really the start of the war. That was in September 1st, 1939. Mm-hmm. And we really felt it because I was Polish on both sides. My mother and father both Polish. Mm-hmm. And so that hit us pretty hard.
Did they immigrate? Were they both immigrants from Poland?
They were both from Poland, and it turned out that my mother was visiting Poland just before the war started. She was visiting relatives and barely got back home. Uh-huh. So we were on pins and needles, hoping she'd make it back okay, because everybody was trying to get out of Europe when they knew what was coming.
Yeah, after what happened in Austria and Czechoslovakia, Poland was pretty much next.
Yes. Oh yeah. It was. There was a lot more to it than that, because as things developed later, there was a execution of Polish officers, those that were captured by Russia. Turns out that Russia executed 15,000 Polish officers, and few of them were police. Yeah. So it was kind of a hidden or a secret thing as to who did it, because Russia claimed the Germans did it, Germans claimed the Russians did it, and we didn't find out until Gorbachev was talking with Reagan, where Gorbachev admitted that Russia did it.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was tough when the Russians and the Germans both invaded Poland at the same time.
Oh yeah, from both, within 24 hours. It was sort of a little pact between them that,
yeah.
When you think of it now, and then another one, Japan came in on the side a little bit later, and it looked like we really had a world war on our hands. But in only 4 short years, we somehow managed to subdue all of them. And it seems like we're in one war after another. We always seem to think that, this is going to be the last war.
Yeah.
And it never ends. So.
Yeah, kind of human nature. Everybody wants to.
Everybody needs help, yeah. And U.S. is a very, very giving country.
Yeah.
I can't think of anyone has their soldiers' graves on foreign land more than the U.S. We got people all over the world, yeah, that never made it back home to the States.
Yes. Did you have family members in Poland that were injured or killed when the invasion occurred?
Actually, I don't hear much from that side. There was quite a bit of movement of people. My family happened to come from the southern part of Poland, and near Krakow. Mm-hmm. You might know it wasn't too far from where the Pope John Paul II came from too. Uh-huh. But anyhow, I never visited Poland. I tried to at the end of the war, and the army said they couldn't be responsible. We did not have very good relations with Russia at the time.
Right.
So I never made it. And even after, long after the war was over, Russia was pretty much in control of Poland, the way things worked out with the way the treaty happened, it turned out that Stalin insisted on more control over Europe, and it seemed the U.S. gave it to him, and I sort of never wanted to visit while the communists were there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. When Pearl Harbor happened, you were a senior. Did you think that you were probably going to be going to the war then, as your senior year in high school ended?
Well, I really wasn't sure, because at the time I was from high school, the only college that I wanted to go to, a college that was all boys, and because I also went to an all boys high school in Detroit, the University of Detroit, and I had an idea that I may have wanted to become a priest at the time. So I was sort of thinking about it, and something made me change my mind. Later in the war, I felt that maybe I should go and help out a little bit that I could, and so I left. By the way, when you're in the seminary, you're not really a candidate for priesthood until you're in third year college. I was only in the first year. You're just a student. That's all. You're taking Latin, Greek, and whatnot, and you get. But the war convinced me that maybe it's more important for me to help out a little bit if I can before it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you graduated in 1942. Did you go directly to college then out of high school?
Yes, I went straight to college, yeah.
And you went to, what was the name of the college that you went to?
Sacred Heart Seminary.
Sacred Heart Cemetery.
Seminary, yeah.
Was that around Detroit? It is in Detroit.
It's in Detroit area.
So the seminary, which obviously is a school to prepare you for being a priest.
Yes, but the early college is really not, you're not into the serious part until you get to about the third year of college, and I left when I was still in my first. I think I finished 1 year.
Yeah. So you were more in the general studies part of the program.
I was in the general studies. That's correct.
And so you left after 1 year. Did you join the Army as you left college?
That's when I left. Yes, I had to join the Army. I had an injury in playing football. We had a minor football team, and I broke an ankle, but it was well healed. And by the way, when I finally went to the draft board, they couldn't find my name. It was so low, and it was under a pile of papers. Because I was a divinity student, they didn't think I was ever going to be drafted. So they almost couldn't find my name. And I said, well, I felt it's time to go and do my part.
Yeah.
Because if I did leave, supposing the war ended and all of a sudden, I said, I don't want to become a priest. People would say, you know what Walter did? He sat in a seminary to get out of the war. I didn't want that on my shoulders. Yeah.
Right. So where did you go to basic training at?
I went to Mineral Wells, Camp Walters, Wolters, Camp Walters, Texas, and I was there for 6 months, January 44 till June or so, and then you had a little furlough before they shipped you overseas.
Did you go directly overseas then?
Yes, yes. Then I went overseas, and we went in a huge convoy. Everywhere we looked, there were ships. It's as if you were in the center of them, and you always went in a huge convoy like that. And then we were going straight. And by the way, we didn't know where we were going. It was so secret. There were rumors we're going to the Pacific. There were rumors we're going to Europe. We ended up in Europe, North Africa. From North Africa, I ended up for 2 months in Italy, waiting to be attached to a unit. Finally, the invasion of southern France happened, Nice and Marseille. And then they said, well, they needed Walter. So somehow a Jeep took me, once we landed in Marseille, they were going so fast we couldn't catch up to the company they assigned me to, Company K, 36th Division. And finally, I ended up at their temporary headquarters in the basement somewhere. And when the staff sergeant interviewed us, he listened to my voice and he said, you know, I think you'd be a good replacement for our radio man. So I was in the company platoon, and gave me a big radio on my shoulder, and there were 3 of us that took turns, and we rotated when we had to go either looking for the enemy or whatever. So I joined them in a little bit after Lyon, France. That's in the area they sometimes call Alsace Lorraine. Mm-hmm. And that area has been part-time German, part-time French, part-time German, they didn't know what they were. So anyhow, that's where I finally joined them. And from then on, it was France, Germany. At the end of the war, on May the 8th, 1945, I rode into Austria on a tank.
On the day the war ended?
On the day the war ended, yep. I into, what's that called, Salzburg?
Salzburg?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's that's where Hitler's
headquarters.
Yeah. He was there.
He was there,
Salzburg. Yeah. So you landed initially in North Africa.
Well,
you came over from.
We only stopped there for a while with the boat. Yeah.
Just to kind of refuel and things like that.
Yes, that's right.
And then you went up to Italy. And then there
2 months there.
Oh, you were 2 months in Italy.
Yeah, I didn't know, but they were waiting for the invasion of southern France.
So this was probably towards the end of 1944. You were in Italy. September or the fall of 44.
Actually, yeah. There's a whole. By the way, the division printed a history of the whole 36th Division. Mm-hmm. Looks almost like a telephone book.
Yeah.
And it gives a lot. If I forget the date, all I got to do is open it up, and it's in there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then you were a couple months there waiting for the invasion, and then you joined the 36th Division and tried to find them in southern France as they were on the move.
Yes, I don't know. At that point, I'm not sure. I don't know how the Army worked in the headquarters part, but I don't know if I was destined to be in the 36th, or could I have been in any of the other divisions that were on the Western Front. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They just had you available. They needed someone, and you got plugged into a spot, probably.
Yeah. Soldiers are dispensable. If a bunch of them get hurt or even killed, there's a whole bunch behind waiting to replace them.
Yeah.
That's the way the Army. That's just the truth of war.
Yes.
Otherwise, you can't fight wars if you don't have replacements.
Yeah. And you were there, and you got plugged into the Company K of the 36th Division.
Yes, I ended up with Company K, 36th Division.
And you were a radio man?
I was a radio man from day one.
What was your military occupational specialty? Do you remember? It probably wasn't that, but...
I was just in the headquarters platoon of the Company K.
Yeah. And were you on the front lines being a radio man? Were you near the front lines as they moved forward?
I was on the front lines for a good 9 months. Uh-huh. 9 months. Mm-hmm. And the only relief you had was they wanted you to shower once in a while.
Yeah.
And so, very rarely you might have gotten a weekend somewhere in, if they hit us, there was a place where there was a, what do you call it, something like a spa. Well, you might get a day or two to rest there. And then you were pretty sure you're going to be gone for at least a month, at least. And when you're on the front lines, you are in danger every minute because mortar, artillery, bombing. By the way, sometimes we were even bombed by our own planes. Our own planes. I don't know how I was so lucky. I sort of attribute it to my guardian angel, but that's just me. You know.
Yeah. So what are had the Battle of the Bulge taken place? Were you near it when you joined?
I wasn't. No, I was further
Division?
south. That was further north.
Yeah, that was further
Yeah, I
north
was in
along the Belgian
I was in
border.
the 7th Army, and that was further up north. I had a friend who was in Patton's army, and he never made it home. But and I was in. I'm trying to think of the name of the general, but it escapes me right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, the Alsace Lorraine, you're correct. It was, for hundreds of years, it's been back and forth between the Germans and the French.
Yeah, back and forth. In fact, I remember going into a basement of a guy, a Frenchman, who was making, he had a big barrels making champagne. And he basically said to us, "What are you doing here?" He didn't care if he sold champagne to Germans or to Americans or who.
Yes.
If we never came, he would have been happier. So we weren't always wanted, but in most places we were greeted quite handsomely once they knew we were Americans.
Yeah. Were you close to Saar territory?
To her?
To Saar territory in Germany?
Saar?
Saar, yeah.
No.
You were a little further
Not
east
that I, yeah, not
or
that
west
I,
of
yeah,
that. Yeah.
Yeah. I ended up, we were in the Vosges Mountains for a good part of the winter.
Okay.
I remember walking through, it was so cold, I remember walking through a river that wasn't too deep, and when we got out on the land, the pants just froze, stiff like a board. So I don't know if that contributed to a little bit of leg problems or not, but it could have, yeah.
Yeah. So you were on the front lines. Did you come into contact with the Germans or Italians much, or were they always retreating?
Yes, and it was kind of strange that I was lucky when I was in college. I had a choice between taking, they said to get my degree that I wanted, Bachelor of Arts, I need to take a foreign language. And they didn't consider, I did speak Polish, but they said they call it the Romantic languages or something. And French, Spanish, or German. I chose German. And luckily, it helped me a little bit. Every so often we got a prisoner, I could actually communicate a little bit. And sometimes we even captured Polish soldiers who were forced
to fight with
from the Polish side. They were brought onto the French side to fight. And so once in a while we were really lucky. And that information, when it went to headquarters, they knew that the Polish guys told me that most of these people are unwilling to fight. Some of them are even injured, they're weak. And so that information went straight to the headquarters, that if they want to attempt an invasion in this location, might be a good place to capture a bunch of prisoners. So the language, it turned out that the German came in handy, and the Polish, well, I was very fluent in Polish. Yeah.
So you were pretty fluent in English and Polish, but you had enough German to help you get by.
I had enough German to help me, enough, yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah. So you were in Alsace Lorraine, and you were moving through southern Germany towards Austria?
We were moving then, actually, Germans were pretty well entrenched in France. We still had spent quite a bit of time in France before we hit Germany.
Okay.
Quite a time, yeah. So the first part of the war, I believe a town called, sometimes even in France, I'm trying to think of a town called Middleware, where it was, we had. I'm surprised I made it through there. They were, you know, every so often you hit the German, what they call the SS troops, and they were stubborn.
Well trained.
They were people that wanted to die for their fatherland, and we sort of obliged them eventually. But anyhow, you knew every so often there were unwilling soldiers on the other side, and sometimes they were the real bad ones. So sometimes you spent 3 days with almost no sleep because they were just constantly pounding you day and night. Even though I was a radio man, my job was to see to it that the poor guys out there in the outposts have communication. You don't want to be out there and think you're all alone. And we had to run wires from our headquarters to each outpost that was out there. Guys were out there all by themselves in a building. And by the way, those buildings were like cement or mud, if you wanted to. It didn't have to be cemented, but they were about 2 feet thick because they've had nothing but wars there for centuries. So every time, believe it or not, if a mortar shell, we just ran out of wire to this guy out here. 10 minutes later, a shell falls in. Guess what? The wire's broken. Run it. You wouldn't believe how much. I don't know where the Army got all that wire from, but boy, did we have wire. You had to have. We didn't have cell phones.
No.
No. So we couldn't talk to them. And by the way, my radio, I've been wondering for some time if somebody would tell me how heavy it was, because a couple of times I had to jump head first through a window to avoid a machine gun down the road there. So with that radio on my back, it got to be a joke in the company that, oh, there goes Walter again jumping in head first, because I mean, if someone's firing at you, you're going to find enough strength to jump through a window. Yeah.
So how often did you come into contact with German or Italians then on the field?
Well,
was it like once a week, or?
As a radio man, there were usually 3 of us, and we would rotate. You'd know it's your turn. Leg would go one day, another guy would go, and then me, and then we would just rotate. We'd go out with a patrol, hoping to capture a German. We'd go looking for them. You wanted to know how far are they from where you are right now, and how well equipped. And by the way, once in a while, we would have like the Moroccans would be right next to us. They were partying. We always were taught to be quiet. Don't let them know where you are. Right next to us, the Moroccan army, which was supposed to be with us, and they're having parties and at night and all. Well, they just operate differently. So we were always glad to get rid of them, and we'd rather have somebody alongside of us that thinks like we do.
Yeah. So you had a number of other international army units close to you.
Oh yeah, yeah. We were often next to, I'm trying to think of. I don't remember being next to the Canadian, but.
Were the British?
Yeah. It turned out that most of the time there were so many American companies that you were next to an American company almost always. Yeah. Just once in a while there was a fluke, and like I said, there could have been a Moroccan or one of those. Some of the I can't think of besides Morocco. There were several different foreign companies, but U.S. had so many division. Each division had all those companies.
Right.
A, B, C, D, K, all the way up to M and N. So the probability of being next to an American company was like 90%.
Yeah. So you spent the winter probably in northern France then?
Yes, yes.
That's where you spent the winter months.
I don't even remember. I don't remember exactly when we crossed into Germany, but basically, we were going village to village. You got this town, and remember, the enemy had the advantage of always setting up a defense before you got there.
Mm-hmm.
As a advancing force, you have a disadvantage because they dig in.
Mm-hmm.
You don't. They dig in. So it's kind of crazy, but the advantage that America had, we air power, planes. We could call for planes. Being I was a radio man, I could call for artillery. When I saw a target, and I was pretty good at saying 600 yards to the left. And so I had a pretty good mathematical judgment.
Yeah.
And so as a radio man, it really helped to be and by the way, the Army gives you, when you go back to school, I got some credit hours for being in the Army because you learn things like map reading, courses on first aid.
Uh-huh.
Even though you're not a medic,
yeah,
you still learn some first aid in case you got to help a medic.
Right.
So one of the medals I got here, the Silver Star, right close to the end of the war, March 15th, the Ides of March, we had to go through a minefield to try to take that stupid town. I often wondered that. I thought it was a terrible blunder, but because I thought to myself, why didn't we just shell all those mines and we could walk in without stepping on them? We had a lot of shells. Some general further up in the regiment or division wanted to surprise the enemy. It's no surprise once the guy steps on a mine. So I always thought it was a blunder, but it turned out that the medal was awarded because as a radio man, after 2 platoon leaders stepped on a mine and got hurt, I got on a radio and I said, I need a tank. I thought to myself, if a tank comes and goes through that field, we can walk in the tracks. And sure enough, it worked. And they decided to give me a medal because an awful lot of guys still have their legs today.
Because of that?
Because of that, yeah.
That's good. Where was it at? What town were you trying to take that they had the mines?
This was a town called Bischoffen. Bischoffen.
Mm-hmm.
We sort of renamed it Bitchhofen, but it's called Bischoffen. Yeah. Yeah. That was really close to the end of the war.
Uh-huh. You said March 15th.
March 15th was at 1 o'clock in the morning. And by the way, I didn't know this. The whole front moved at 1 o'clock in the morning.
Really?
I didn't know that till after the war. It wasn't just us. The whole front moved at 1 o'clock in the morning, and then there were what do you call, other divisions waiting right. We were supposed to open up the road, and they were ready to go through. It was the final
push into Germany.
Final push, and it ended on May the 8th, and they surrendered.
So you went through Bischoffen on March 15th, and you captured that.
So from March 15th to May, that all we were doing was cleaning up. They knew it was over. There was what else could they do? Yeah.
Did you travel much past Bischoffen on your way to Austria? You said you were in Strasbourg when the war ended.
We were cleaning up. Actually, the war ended so fast after March 15th. Germans weren't able to hide what they didn't want us to see. And as soon as the war ended, and I told you I came into Austria, I came into Austria on a tank. We were only there for a few days, and they sent us back. They said, we have to go. The 101st Airborne discovered a place called Landsberg. Landsberg, it turned out that it was a disposal site, and back in the early days, Landsberg was a prison. Mm-hmm. Hitler wrote his Mein Kampf in that camp, in the Landsberg. We had to go and watch it because they couldn't dispose of all the bodies. There were a whole bunch of, remember, they were still killing as many Jews as they could. So we had to go and guard it so that they couldn't. Of course, the Germans were, by this time, were so disorganized, they didn't know they were coming or going. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the Germans managed to go back home. The war was over for them.
Yeah.
What else could they do? Yeah. But it turned out that the 101st Airborne found this place, Landsberg, and then we took over from the 101st Airborne because they were already exhausted.
And you were cleaning up bodies and doing that type of work?
Yeah, we had German prisoners that we forced them to bury some of these people. They were mass graves. Yeah, there were piles of like these glasses, piles of glasses of the people that they disposed of at this disposal site. And by the way, there was a railroad track coming from other parts of Germany, and there were bodies dangling from the top of the open cars. Mm-hmm. Just emaciated. You could just about see the bones. So these people looked like they starved to death.
So were they trying to get them out of there so you wouldn't find them?
They were bringing them to this disposal site.
Okay.
And the war ended. They couldn't pick the day the war ended. We picked the day the war ended. Yeah. So yeah.
Was that the first site like that you came up on, or
the
that
first
you
site like that? You mean this point? Yeah, I would say so. I don't think I saw another one. No, I don't. That was the. I mean, where you saw they even had, like I said, piles of glasses. There were another pile there of hair that they for some reason they shaved people. Now remember this was not one of the places where they gassed people. Mm-hmm. They killed them elsewhere, brought them by train, car, open top cars, and sometimes they were even inside of a car. They used to call the cars 40 and 8. 40 people or 8 horses. 40 and 8. Hmm. And anyhow, they were so surprised. Even the 101st Airborne, mm-hmm. when they happened to land in this particular place. Well, and it was the place where in 1933 Hitler wrote. He was in jail there, and he wrote his Mein Kampf right in that jail. Yeah.
So a lot of those prisons in Germany, they turned into camps. Prison camps.
When I saw a map, I was looking for Landsberg on a map at the what's the museum in Washington. They have a museum, the
Holocaust Museum.
Holocaust Museum, and they got this big map of Germany, and I said, Landsberg, and there were hundreds of Landsberg. How did they get rid of so many Jewish people? They had to have a lot of places to kill them. It wasn't enough just one. It wasn't just Auschwitz.
No. Oh no. They were all over.
They were all over the place.
Yeah. Austria, Germany.
All over. Yeah.
Western Poland. All over. Yeah. So how long did it take you to clean up that camp then?
Well, mostly, and by the way, nobody. I remember there was a guy. We were on a truck coming into Landsberg, and there was a DP, displaced person. There was a displaced person saying, "Ich bin Amerikaner, ich bin Amerikaner." And one of the guys next to me said, "What's he saying?" "He's saying I'm an American." So the guy next to me, my buddy, he said, "If he's an American, how come he's talking Dutch?" He meant Deutsch. But anyhow, if he's an American, you'd think he would be talking American. Imagine a guy, a DP saying, "Ich bin Amerikaner, I am American." So after that particular time, everything was, remember, the war was over, and we were getting settled into peacetime. Once they surrendered, the officers came to us and they said, "Pick any house you want. Any house you want. You're going to sleep in a bed tonight." We could go to any house and tell the people. Once they surrendered, May the 8th. On May the 8th, we picked a house, and that night we slept in a bed instead of sleeping on the ground somewhere on one of those cushions, or what do you call it? The bag, duffel bag, or not a duffel bag. We had a zip bag. You could sleep at night, even on a cold night, and just zip up, and it was cotton filled, you know, nice and toasty warm. Yeah.
So you were cleaning camp up. Where did you go from there? Did you go back to Austria, or did you stay in Germany as you?
I came into the war late, and we had ASR points, Army Service Record. If you had a lot of points, you went home first. I was there for almost another year. I ended up in Frankfurt. I was a company clerk. I kept the records of our company. The guys who were there way before me were well in the States already.
Yeah.
And I must have been there for about another year. And when my turn came up, I was taken home. And as I recall, they didn't fly us home. They took us home in boats. Yeah, Army boats.
Yeah. So so you were there from 1944, late 1944 through into 1946 then.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
And when you came back in the boat, I'm sure they were boats. They had a lot of military personnel, carriers that you came back on.
Yeah.
Transports.
Now before that, in Frankfurt, the U.S. Army had its headquarters in Frankfurt. In fact, Eisenhower was in another building in that same complex that I was in. Eisenhower's office was there. And then a lot of us, some of us became company clerks. The later you came in, the longer you had to stay. So they had to find something for you to do. I became company clerk for the 36th Division, and we finally wound things down to where it was a nice, peaceful time. Once the war ended, no more shooting.
Yeah.
Everything was fine. Yeah.
So did you take a train then to one of the ports to get out of there, out of Frankfurt?
How did we?
Do you remember? And then you loaded up on a boat?
I think we loaded up on a boat in somewhere near Normandy. You know, I can't really remember that. And some of that is slipping away.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't.
Havre Grace.
I just seem to remember going back on a boat.
Yeah.
And
when you landed back in the States, where did you land at? Were you?
I believe we landed in Newark.
In Newark, New Jersey?
Which is just about where we left from too. Yeah.
And how long were you immediately discharged then, or were you in the States?
I was discharged in. I had to go to a camp in Wisconsin. I can't remember. There was a camp for ending your service. What did they?
And discharging.
Discharge, yeah, honorable discharge, and they fixed the most sumptuous, inviting dinner, they wanted you to sign up for another 2-3 years for Korea, probably. So there was no way I was going to sign up for another 2-3 years. No, I had enough.
Yeah.
I had enough for a lifetime.
So you were discharged then in 1946.
About 1946, yeah. From in Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are there anything that you remember that stick out in your mind from your service in Europe? Any stories that you haven't told that you remember very clearly, any circumstances that were scary or funny or anything?
Well, look, those 2 towns I mentioned, Mittelwehr and Bischofchen, I mean, they really stand out. But, you know, sometimes the night patrols, they would just say, well, let's, they would pick a squad from one of the companies, and then they would need a radio man to go out. Okay, I told you 3 of us took turns. Now, in one of those turns, if it had been my turn, it turns out that one of my buddies, his last name was Legg, L-E-G-G, he was captured. If that had been my turn that night, I would have been captured. And I would not be having this, probably. I don't think I would. Where would it come from? So it was almost like destiny, Ides of March. And by the way, I took quite a few Latin courses being in a seminary and a regular school. And the Ides of March was particularly hammered in. And it turned out that on that day was that minefield incident in Bischofchen, yeah. So it was, lately when people ask me, I credit my guardian angels. Somebody had a watch. There was in that Mittelwehr one, that's a whole story. That's a book by itself. In the Mittelwehr, when we were trying to leave town, that's the one I told you where there was a machine gun down the road, and we had to go into that building right across. So you didn't have much time to get you. I jumped in through the top to the window. But in that Mittelwehr, as we were leaving the town, we could not agree. Our company came to help the company that took over from us just the night before. He didn't want to go out at night. My company commander said, I'm not staying here. For us to get out of town, by the time we got ready to leave, a German got up to the church tower. We were standing by a wall, and when he fired on us, trying to hit all of us, I saw a chip to the right of me, and I saw a chip to the left of me, just come off the wall. It was a cement wall, it was like a cemetery or something behind there.
Yeah.
I never quite. Anyhow, that's how close. You know, didn't take him long to get up to the tower, and he thought. And by the way, I don't know if you know this. Our machine guns go tut 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 tut. The German machine guns go. Brr, brr. They go much faster, but they're not as accurate. So anyhow, that's the kind of thing you put up with. So that was a good chance for them to get me. They could have gotten me if it was my turn to go the day that my friend Legg got captured. Well, Providence, is it Providence or is it coincidence? I don't know. My guardian angel could tell you.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Sounds good. So, do you have any other family members that were in the service?
I had a twin brother. He was in the service. Oddly enough, he went into the service a year before me, and he never saw action. He was in the cavalry. Imagine, cavalry. They were training donkeys to go up places where a jeep couldn't go. His company commander was a Western movie star, Tim Holt. He was in charge. Tim Holt was in charge of the cavalry, U.S. And no sooner they brought his outfit to Europe just before the war ended. Okay, they don't need him anymore. They send him all the way back to the Pacific in case they need him. So he was going back and forth, and he never actually got action on the front. Yeah. Never. It was never needed at the front. He was.
Yeah.
They were standby.
Yeah.
If you need them, they're there.
Yeah.
So that was my twin brother. Yeah.
So after you got out of the service, you said you went in a career in education. Did you go back to college then?
Me?
Yeah.
We had a family business. My father ran for years and years. My father had built 3 movie theaters in Detroit, and we thought that we might end up rest of our life running movie theaters, but you saw what happened to the movies. TV came out, and movies just... At one time, Detroit had 200 theaters. Right now, I understand there's 1. In the city of Detroit, there's theaters on the suburbs, but in the city of Detroit, there's only 1 theater right now. There used to be 200. Little boxes, some of them. Yeah. But that's all they had in those days, even silent days, you might remember. Oh, yeah.
So, so did you work in the theater industry, or after they got out of there, did you go to college?
As the theaters were going down pretty fast, one closing after another, we couldn't even afford the operator. We had to finally become projectionists ourselves. There were enough of us boys. Occurred to me, I have to find a new line of work. And I remember always thinking that one of my sisters, who was a teacher, I said, you got a pretty soft summers off and pretty good pay and, steady work. So I decided to go into teaching, and I became a teacher. I started in social studies, but then when Sputnik happened, I decided the National Science Foundation started, and they offered us training in mathematics, and I was always good in math. So I became a math and computer teacher in high school, yeah.
And that was your career?
That was my career, yes. I ended up, and I finally ended up teaching. It was kind of getting rough to teach in Detroit with 4 daughters. So a friend of mine, who was also in the same program I was in, from Canada, we became very close friends. We still are today. And he convinced me to, why don't you come up and try Canada for a couple of years? They had a special deal, 2 years income tax free, if you'll come and just try them out. I went for that 2-year experiment, and I stayed for 35 years in Canada. I have dual citizenship now. Yeah. I go back and forth.
Well, Walter, thank you for everything, for your service during World War II, and thank you for your interview.
Oh, you're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I think people should know what was going on. Yeah.